All right, we're here for part 2 of the Descriptive Analysis lecture series, and this is where we're jumping into what on earth does the data collection tools look like, and how do we go about that data collection? Well, we've done enough experiential data collection in class where we're passing out those samples, we're making sure that we have informed consent, we are providing appropriate risk-based statements so that people know whether they should be participating or not participating. And from there, then we're going through that protocol of assigning randomized samples with coded labeling so that we know as the analysts what those samples are, and our panelists who are participants do not know what the sample is, and there's randomization within those samples. We've also designed a survey tool so that the participants can interact and have their data collected in a really nice, tight, and organized fashion. So I wanted to jump into the survey tool that I've developed. Now, this is from an actual live descriptive analysis project that we did, and it was from a few years ago, and some of you may know as you're reading about the description here what the actual survey was and what the actual product was. But just to give a background story, a company came to Research and Innovation and asked us to help design a hard cider product. And we went through, I do know that the college has talked about the relationship with the cider manufacturer, so I feel confident that I can show you some of the elements of this survey tool without being in conflict of interest. I will not name the client, however, just for the sake of their confidentiality, and I will not, I've blinded all the data so that we can't actually tell what products we're looking at. So we went through and did a risk-based statement. We had pre-recruited from people who were from the alcohol sector so that we knew that they were already going to be accepting the risks involved with consumption of alcohol. These were some of our sommelier instructors, some of our winemakers, some of our brewmasters, our culinary staff that had background in alcohol beverage service, and those were the participants that we went with because we didn't have an extended budget to be able to recruit and train and train and train and train, and just like in our first video, go through that extended expense of training and retraining our participants. So our survey tool starts off with this questionnaire just to give a bit of a risk statement, but we had pre-cleared the participants based off of their knowing that they were going to be participating in an alcohol type survey. So we did need to train them, however, because we weren't sure if they were going to have seen a 15 centimeter line scale type tool before. And so we did a rapid training with these individuals where we gave them an example. Here's an example of how a 15 centimeter line scale works. We did a graphic of different peppers. We said you've got a bell pepper, a cayenne pepper, and a ghost pepper. They have different levels of heat. Describe the heat of the bell pepper, and then we put in a line or a slider bar. And within SurveyMonkey, or within many of these online survey tools, you can define how many points are on that slider bar. And it just happens that we went in and defined the slider bar so that it would have 150 points. Now you'll note when I go in and try and do any editing, I had paid out for this survey tool, and I'm paying out right now enough during COVID pandemic for all sorts of different apps. I'm not going to re-upgrade my SurveyMonkey just to be able to show you how to do this. But in essence, this was a slider bar, and we adjusted it such that it would have 150 points. It just happened that in that box down there, it gave you what the point score was, which was lovely. And we were able to go through and say, describe the heat of the bell pepper. And when we were doing that rapid training, we said, okay, The bell pepper should be down here in the no heat range. Describe the heat of the cayenne pepper. It should be somewhere in this mid half to 2/3 range. And the heat of the ghost pepper, it should be in the far right of the slider bar. And so we did a rapid training with the participants, and from there we went into the product itself. And so they had the product, and it was blinded with a 3-digit code. And they went through, we did the attributes internally. So it was myself and Gavin Robertson and Ryan Monkman and David Lee. We went through and determined what we felt the attributes should be. And we didn't want to overcomplicate it. We also consulted with the client, and excuse me, we discussed what they thought the important attributes would be within this product as well. The challenge is you go to someone like Gavin, who's our head winemaker and a cider expert, and he will come up with a list of attributes that's 50, 60 attributes long, and we needed to make sure that it was relative to the average consumer in their home, on their patio, who doesn't have that level of complexity. We wanted to make sure that it was a delicious and robust and well-crafted product, but we knew that the attributes that we needed to really be honing in on were going to be the sweetness. And so we had some discussion about what the sweetness would be, but then we let them score the product blind. Acidity, again, no acid to very acidic. Fresh apple flavor, artificial apple flavor, and if you are a cider drinker, you may have tried some of the different national branded ciders that are out there, and some of them have a much more natural type of flavor, and some of them have a very candy, artificial, almost tastes like a fuzzy apple candy, or I'm just shaking my head right now. You can't see me shaking my head, but a very artificial candy-like flavor profile. And we wanted to make sure that we were mapping that as well. A number of the national brand ciders have with added apple flavor as part of their ingredient declaration. Yeastiness, because again, in many of the traditional ciders, yeast or estery sort of baked flavor is very typical. We didn't go into things like Brettanomyces or other ester profiles. We felt that yeast was sufficient, and then the alcohol flavor of the product, carbonation level of the product, and those were the attributes that we felt were going to be important within this descriptive analysis. Now, just for the sake of disclosure, this was not a typical descriptive analysis, and we then went into additional questions that were more focus group styled, but we were able to then hone in on some additional attributes that the client really wanted to know about. And from there, we were able to get, I'm going to jump out to analyze results. And as you know very well, SurveyMonkey is going to give these aggregate tables down at the end. When you are in the full platform, you would be able to export your data out. If I was to redo this survey now, I don't think I'd be using SurveyMonkey. I really do like SurveyMonkey, and it's quite a lovely tool. However, I think I would be going to Google Forms, because the export quality on the data is just that little bit more straightforward. Again, SurveyMonkey has a lot of merit, and it's been one of the initial market leaders in terms of development of survey tools. Google Forms, I find that the export ability on the data is a lot more practical for sensory analysis. But you can see the sort of, when we were in the full paid feature, we were able to get the full disaggregated data. And I'm going to right now make you dizzy as I scroll through here. I'm going to switch screens here and jump out to what on earth this data is going to look like. I blinded the data, but we were able to go in, and so on the sweetness, cider 1, again it's blinded so we can't tell which product it was, but every panelist had scrolled along that 150 centimeter line scale, or the 150 point slider bar, if I can rename it, and you can see how you've got this disaggregated data now by each of the different attributes, so sweetness, acidity, fresh apple, etc. This is just the raw data from the analysis. We now have to turn this into something visualize. And so how visualization within descriptive analysis is done is there's a few different ways. You saw in the slide deck that was shared with Niagara College by Amy Bowen from Vineland Research and Innovation Center, is that oftentimes they're going to be doing ANOVA with looking at the standard deviation in ANOVA to see, are these data sets different or the same? So we could go along and say, between cider 1, cider 2, and cider 3, is the sweetness different or the same? And you could evaluate the sweetness data by ANOVA and identify the difference within there. For the purposes of what our client wanted, they wanted more of a power ranking XY sort of graphing, and so they paired each attribute, sweetness and acid, yeast and alcohol, natural versus artificial, and alcohol and carbonation into pairings, because their end goal in this analysis was that they wanted to, I'm going to see if I can increase the size here, but we turned these into XY attributes, and we're able to map out these XY attributes to see if there was clustering within the graphing. They wanted to see which of the different national brands clustered into these different spaces. They wanted to make sure that their brand aligned with a certain viewpoint, and we were able to say, based on, you'll note here in that we had additional attributes that we were ranking, including the personality, the marketing personality of this product. So was it a casual beverage? Was it a serious beverage? Was it an artificial beverage or a natural beverage? Was it a youthful beverage or a mature beverage? And who resonated with the attributes based off of the marketing demographics that they were looking at. So what they wanted to see was, based off of that, and you'll note, oh, everything's blinded, too bad. Did this data cluster based off of some of the marketing attributes, and therefore, based off of their target market, make sure that the formulations that we were evaluating fell into the right clustering group? At the same time, too, we also wanted to make sure that we didn't overlap too close to some of these clusters, to make sure that there was unique differentiation in that product. They wanted to make sure that there was a clear and unique quality to the product, while still at the same time clustering within the family of products that they wanted to be with. So in this case, it was taking the attribute and defining one as the X. So in this case, the sweetness was the X value, and acidity was going to be the Y value within an XY graphing. I've put these files up for you in Blackboard so that you can go in and manipulate them yourself. Now, another type of data analysis that was used very commonly in descriptive analysis is using radar graphs, or spider plots, as they're sometimes called. And they look like spider webs of sorts. And this is a function within Excel, and you can do, they're calling them radar charts. But the idea being the axis, what would be typically considered an X or Y axis, goes off in all sorts of different directions, and you turn each one of these into an axis for each of the attributes that you're after. Now, this was a data set that we collected years ago in a class. Sorry, Jenna, we're not doing Chardonnay, but if we were doing Chardonnay, this is the type of data that I would have liked to collect with the group. We just happened to have cider, and we had hard apple cider, and I happened to doctor it. We only had one brand, but I took the apple cider and I added some elderflower syrup, so the elderflower attribute, and I also added some bee pollen and honey to some of the samples to be able to modify the flavor profiles and give it a more powdery, estery sweetness that was very complementary to the apple cider profile. There are apple ciders that have elderflower extract. Rekorderlig is I believe it's a Swedish brand, and it has an elderflower apple cider product, which is, I think, a really fun and delicious. It's a bit sweet and cloying, but it's a fun and delicious product. And other people are known to take a bit of Saint-Germain liqueur and dose their apple cider with that. So what we did was we took the different numbers and we arranged them on the spider graph so that what we were looking for was, are we seeing clear differentiation between these products? Now, conversely, radar graphs are actually a really nice visualization, not so much from a, do I have a unique and different product, but is my product the same? You know very well that I was part of the Mothers Against Drunk Driving MAD Virgin Lager project years ago, and myself and Becky Griffin, we did a lot of descriptive analysis, and every week Becky would be out reformulating the product. Every one of these attributes on the different axes, we were able to know that it was through this processing technique or this ingredient modification that we were modifying the axis. And so we were mapping out Mothers Against Drunk Driving, all the different versions that we were formulating, and comparing it to the standard North American lagers. So Labatt's Blue, Molson Canadian, Niagara College First Draft Lager. We were mapping to see where they mapped out, and we wanted actually to get as close as possible to mapping our lager formulation to one of theirs. And the visualization of the radar graph made it very convenient because we were looking to see how close can we get these lines to overlap one another. Right now, the overlap is pretty ridiculous on this. You don't have a clear, well, you could say the overlap on this point here, the orange and blue are overlapping, but we were trying to hone in those points so that the radar graph for the Mad Virgin Lager would overlap as close as possible to the radar graph for a classic North American lager. And so this tool became extremely useful. Every week we would have our panel come down and they would hang out with us in HT005, and we would drink all the samples, and we would, at that point in time we were using paper. We would collect paper survey tools, and we'd enter the data in, and we'd have a radar graph by the end of the day, and that would help define the product development strategy. Which of these attributes do we need to dial up or dial down in the next round of formulation? So again, this Excel file is available for you to take and manipulate from within the Blackboard file. And again, hooray for COVID. I don't want to give you an assignment for this specifically, but I do want you to be able to think about strategically how you would do that data analysis and what is the appropriate response for the type of product development that you're working on, and why you might find that descriptive analysis would be a practical and useful methodology for you. And so with that, I will leave you here. I know that those of you who are in COVID land are going to be joining me on a group chat later on, and hopefully by then these videos will be uploaded so that you can have watched them and be able to discuss with me as we go along. All right, take care, and we'll talk to you soon.